In the hustle world of business, where we're overloaded with content and messages, it seems every blog and social media podcast is churned out by ChatGPT. In this episode, I want to explore how the power of storytelling is the key to communicating effectively in business so we evoke emotion, create connections, and inspire action. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome award-winning business, TV, and newspaper journalist, PR consultant, media trainer, and presentation skills coach, Amber Daines, to Content Catalyst podcast. Welcome, Amber. How are you today?
I am fabulous and love the introduction. And yes, the power of storytelling is everything in business.
Yeah. So if I read out here, I've got you're a seasoned communications expert with over 25 years experience in media, PR, corporate communications, and that you're the founder of Bespoke Communications, which I'd love to talk to you about as well today. So you've been helping business leaders craft compelling stories and communicate with confidence. What I was interested in is that you've worked with many big corporate businesses, Westfield, Qantas, Westpac, TEDx. So today you are focusing, you've got an agency now, which is all about media training, crisis PR, reputation management, and podcasting. And the other interesting thing about Amber is that you're an accomplished author with a best-selling book, Well Said, How to Be Heard in Business and Generate Real Influence. Now, the other thing is that you are a podcast host as well of the Politics of Everything. And you've recently been awarded the Gold Stevie Award winner for the most innovative communications professional of the year. Wow, what an accomplishment.
I know it makes me sound very old as well, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to turn that into the narrative's going to be that I'm accomplished and I'm seasoned and experienced rather than old.
I love that. Somebody else read out my bio on a podcast I did a couple of days ago. And I'm like, I think I need to update that because I think it had like 3 decades. And they went, you don't seem that old. And I'm like, I am that old. But
we started with child prodigies. Let's be honest.
Exactly. Now, I've worked in media and you've worked in media, and I think we've had many conversations about that in the past. But can you share how you've gone from journalist to communications expert? Tell me through your journey.
Interesting. So I actually I've spent more time on what journalists would call the dark side in communications and PR than I was a journalist. However, I really loved being a journalist. I was one of those people that at the age of 8 decided I knew what I wanted to do. And I was very influenced, I guess, at the time by TV journalists like Yana Wendt in Australia and seeing correspondence. And, I never got to be a foreign correspondent, but I did get to travel as a business journalist. And I think for me as a young kid growing up in a very suburban, middle income family where money was always slightly tight and we didn't travel heaps. And that was probably very much the 80s in Australia. We are so far away from the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. It was a great way to tick a lot of boxes. And I loved writing, although being a journalist is not really about writing. And I remember this distinctly when I finished uni. I got my cadetship at the Sydney Morning Herald. It was very competitive. And I remember them saying, like, if anyone says they like writing, they're instantly out of this pool of people. And it's because being a journalist is about much more than how you put the words together or how you put the scripts together for TV and radio, which I've also worked in. It's really about being curious, finding out the truth or a version of the truth, and not coming at it with preconceived ideas. And I think that's probably been the best thing it ever taught me, as well as all the other skills and opportunities I got to travel and so forth.
And so what are you doing now? What's your business look like now?
So I've had a few businesses. I've been in business about 16, almost 17 years now. I never intended to be in business. I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad was an academic and he was a CEO for a long time in property development. And my mother worked in health services. So they were always employed by other people. So I'm probably a bit of an outlier in that sense. I think for me, I started freelancing after a couple of jobs burnt me out in my late 20s, and I kind of never went back. So I did start another agency about 14 years ago with some other people, and we sold that on. And then 2 kids later decided I really wanted to have a leaner micro business. So Bespoke Co was born. And we really focus now, I guess, on, we do small business PR as well, but we do a lot of, corporate work, as you mentioned. So media training, presentation skills, crisis and reputation. We take everyone from strategy through to implementation. Earned media is a big part of what we do. So, what you hear on the radio or on TV and podcasts and on newspapers. But of course, social media plays a role in that narrative as well. So we've really evolved as comms has evolved, if you like, in the last couple of decades.
Yeah, well, it certainly has evolved, hasn't it? I mean, where does the social media landscape fit into all of this now, do you think, in comparison?
Well, I think everyone thinks they're a journalist now, don't they? So there's
Yeah.
there's the difference. So I always say to my clients, journalists have a code of ethics. We have a way in which we will do things. 20 years ago when I worked in TV, you didn't have someone selling you footage from a, fire or a car accident for the TV news. You had to get a camera crew down there and cover it in a different way. Everyone now, it blows my mind. There's something good or bad happens, they get their phone out and they're filming.
Yeah.
And so we live our lives through a lens, but I think we don't have probably the critical analysis. We kind of a bit of a herd mentality when it comes to social media. So I think social media is powerful, but it's got to be part of a broader strategy in your comms. So if you just rely on social media, it depends on your product or service. It's good and it has a moment, but it's gone as well so quickly.
Yeah.
I think there's not a lot of longevity and people don't really remember your stuff as long as, they might if they read a great story about you or if there was something that you were sharing with a really wide audience, because you've got an instant audience with traditional media. You can speak at 200,000 people on Radio National in the morning, and that's really powerful. But it also gives you credibility in a way, which I think, it's great having your own personal brand and so forth, but doesn't everybody have that? And don't we want to be different? So I think people need to think a little bit beyond just the shiny new tech and the platforms that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really big thing. What you said then is about, credibility and social proofing. It's one thing for me to say how good I am, but it's when other people, are telling that story. And I know working in the wine industry for many years, it's like we can stand there and say how great this wine is. But as soon as, Halliday had, recommended the wine, everyone wanted it. And of course it sold out.
Correct.
It's like, it's the old
Third
thing.
party. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think you can't ignore it. I think, the younger generation obviously don't consume media in the same way, but the news of the day is still driven by traditional media. That is the reality. Whatever you see on the radio or TV in the morning, it'll even drive the way social media responds to stuff and content. So that's called newsjacking, and that's a really important part of people's strategy as well.
Yeah. So what do you think are the main challenges that like big corporates and people in business face these days then?
I think when you're in a big monolith company, it's very easy not to do comms well, because you've always got a leader or a team or somebody else or a corporate kind of line to follow. And so to be able to kind of elevate your message and what different offering you have does take a little bit more effort. Like I think you're kind of cushioned, if you like. I see a lot of people who've left corporate and they start their own business, and they often come to me and they're like, it's amazing. I did for 20 years. I was like a solicitor and I'd speak to people all the time, but this is completely different. It's like because you're now on your own and you don't have the backing of a household name brand. So I think for corporates, it's about being really aware that, the audiences will shift and move, and we are in the court of public opinion. So a lot of corporates have a no media policy, like they don't want to speak to the media, but even when times are bad, you can't really do no comment. You don't get away with that anymore. And there's always a whistleblower or someone in your organization that's willing to speak. So I think for most companies now, they're realizing the importance of being agile and nimble in their comms, and not just having a blanket policy, and actually being more human in how they communicate, which doesn't come naturally, believe it or not, to a lot of leaders.
And it's really interesting you say that as well, because I know that big corporates have responded to what's going around on social media as well. So if people have posted up something, corporates can either respond and jump on it, or they can turn the other cheek. And I had an instance recently when I was on the Gold Coast where I'd posted up a story, because my accommodation, was I made an error with my accommodation, and I did a cast out going, hey, you know, would anyone recommend, because this is what's happened where I'm staying, and my, you know, the rate was going to be like twice as much as what I was going to be staying to extend the night. And the next minute, that hotel chain had actually reached out via DMs and responded to me, and then created a solution offline with that. So it's really interesting how like corporates, you know, can be agile, like you said, and communicate effectively, or, you know, not at all. So interesting, isn't it?
It's interesting. And I think it's just changed as the expectations have changed. You know, we do expect a bit more instant communication these days as well.
Accessibility, isn't it?
All the time. I mean, that can be good and bad, but I think when it's a crisis or an issue like what you're talking about, that does demand, you know, some sort of response.
Yeah. And talk to me about what is like, we were talking about corporates then. So what about small businesses? What do you think that their best, you know, foot approach like is moving forward with their comms?
It depends on the type of business. Of course, things that are product based, you know, things like TikTok and Instagram are really great for them to then do with earned media as well. Most people in service based businesses, they are the brand often. So being able to be reaching their audiences through strategic comms is really important. So that might be being like a guest on a podcast like I am today, to reach the right audience, or it could be a plethora of things. The one thing people forget about is, you know, turn those blogs into op-eds. Lots of trade media will publish that, and that reaches a whole new audience. And then you get the reach and the shares and the likes and all the bits you need without having to do all that legwork, because you probably found that as well, Deb, like the algorithm changes all the time, and it's really hard to get cut through. And the other thing I'm really big on at the moment is the scarcity model. So this idea that you post all day, every day, I think people mustn't be doing any work if they're doing that. Like, what are you doing? And so, yes, you can schedule and all of that, but that's a bit tone deaf sometimes if it's not bang on at the right time. So I say to people sometimes, you know, maybe pare that back a little bit. And then when people do hear from you, oh my goodness, I haven't seen you on LinkedIn for 2 weeks. That's great. Whereas if you're posting all the time, I tend to snooze people. And I feel like that's a waste of time for people.
And so for anyone listening that doesn't know what an op-ed is or how to create one, what would you recommend with that?
So that's basically an opinion piece. Every publication pretty much has, if you go onto their website, an opinion section, and they will actually give you guidelines. Please stick to the guidelines. If they say 600 words, 600 words, don't give them 1,000 and go, hey, editor, do your thing. They want it to be the right voice, the right tone. If they want subheads, do subheads. If they might not even be able to do hyperlinks to your business, but might use your name and your byline. So it's about reaching an audience through a view, but the reality is too, we don't do gray in journalism. It's got to be black or it's white. It's the best or the worst. It's the top AI, the worst AI. You know, a human experience leading with your own personal story, because it is an opinion piece. It can be really powerful, or a client story. That's usually like a negative thing that's happened and how that turned around, or surprising or unusual or unexpected things. So it's taking, I guess, journalistic news values and turning that into a piece where your thought leadership is then amplified through that particular type of media. Usually it's online.
Such great advice. I love that so much, because I feel like with blogs at the moment, there is that tendency to churn out whatever, ChatGPT, you know, write me a blog about this. And it becomes very tone deaf, because, you know, I can see the people that do that, and it just, there's no human connection to it. There's no story behind it. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, storytelling. How important is storytelling in our communication?
It's everything, I think, at the moment. I mean, it probably always has been. And even with earned media, I could tell you 9 times out of 10, a journalist will come back to me, even if it's a great pitch or a story idea we've got for a client, whether that be a corporate or a small business, and say, do you have a case study? And often you can be the case study, or your client could be the case study, or your product or service could be part of the case study. And that's all about storytelling. You know, they want, show me, prove it, don't just tell me about it. So that's really the power of storytelling. And if you go into any business media, you will see that I'll often lead with a story. You know, meet Joe Blow. He left his taxes for 5 years. The tax office came knocking on his door. He was up for a $20,000 audit bill. You know, and it kind of then, I guess, reverse engineers into the thought expertise rather than just the promotion of the product or service available. And it's about creating, I guess, relatability or shock and awe. They're the 2 things we're really looking for when we are doing that case study type PR.
I love that. Shock and awe and relatability, two powerful things to keep in mind when we're creating content, I think. And that is, whether it is an opinion piece or, any other kind of content as well, in our emails as well, I feel like, if we're sending out emails to our database, that whole thing of just, copy and pasting and things really doesn't, like you said, it becomes white noise after a while. But I know that even emails that I get sent, if I know that it actually has a relatable story in there from their perspective, I'm more likely to read it, even if it is a longer email. And I like to keep things short and brief in many cases, but I do get taken down that storytelling, road when I read something that I'm interested in as well. So very powerful. Tell me about, with a storytelling, what are your tips on crafting a good story?
I think understanding your hook and understanding your audience. So your hook is your opening line, your sentence, and that could be, if you're doing a keynote speech or a TEDx or a webinar, the worst thing you can do is go, "Hi, my name is Amber Daines from Bespoke Co. Thanks for joining me." I mean,
Right.
you've wasted 12 seconds,
Yeah.
no chance to make that first impression again. People tend to know who you are because it's been promoted or it's on a name card and so forth, or on the screen. So I think
Yeah.
you've got to really capture people from the beginning. So working out what that is, but also right message for the right audience at the right time. They're the three things you've got to do. So it's all very well to have a hero keynote, for example, but you might have to tweak the examples you use if you're talking to a room full of tech startup people versus if you're in a room with a bunch of lawyers or accountants, and they might have, other concerns around what they're doing in their comms. So being mindful, you have to land with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, it's never about you. It's always about them. They're the main things I would share with storytelling. I think we live in a world where we're very much, even the invention of the selfie. I'm the person that will go out to dinner and get the waiter to take a photo of me and my friends at the table,
Mm-hmm.
because the whole idea of taking a selfie, it's just not my thing. It's like,
Yeah, right.
isn't that what my teenage son does? Like, it just doesn't feel like, it feels like we
Yeah.
spend so much time looking at ourselves, is what I'm trying to get to, that we forget that we are really talking to other humans,
Mm.
and they're never as interested in you as they are in themselves. And so at the end of the day, they want to walk away with something they've learned, something they didn't know, or something to think, feel, or do with the message that you are sharing. And that's what you've got to remember from the moment you put pen to paper.
That is so powerful. I was recently working with somebody on their, strategy, and they said, "Oh, I want to make a video like this," and that's the gold standard in the franchise that they were involved in. And it was, the typical video of, "Hi, I'm blah blah blah, and I," and I'm sitting there with this person, and I'm saying to them, "Okay, so when we do this script formula, it's not about it's all about, like you just said, the hook, what's the problem? What is the solution that relates to that person, that relatability?" And so it was really contrasting between, and like when I broke down their script, she's like, I never looked at it like that, but it was the typical, standing, face to camera. And it was just like, I am this and I am that, and and I'm like, no, that's not what people are interested in. It's boring, and it might look pretty, but it's not going to be effective because it has nothing to do with your, person on the other end of the
Exactly.
lens.
Who's the audience and who you're trying to speak
Yes.
to, and actually just picture them, picture what problem you're solving and for whom. So,
Mm.
and that turns around your communication style to be much more extroverted and not less about yourself.
Yeah. Now, we're talking about awards before. How do you feel about awards giving us credibility? Where does that stand in the whole, comms game for you these days?
There's a lot of awards, and I think
Hmm.
the award has to mean something to you, but I can guarantee you it's not going to bring you any new business. And I can say that as someone who wins awards, but I'm also aware of what awards I go into. So every year I'll think about it. I don't want to have just a trophy cabinet of awards. It's, for
Hmm.
me, the Asia Pacific Stevie Award that you mentioned in the intro. I wanted to win a regional award for
Hmm.
comms to kind of punch above my weight in terms of being a small micro agency in Australia. But I also didn't want a gendered award. I didn't want to win
Yeah, right.
a female business award. I've won those, and there's nothing wrong with those, and they're
Sure.
great. But a lot of my clients are men. So, for me,
Yeah.
once again, it's about my
The
audience. And so I think
audience.
it gives you a bit of cred. It's interesting though, when I went over to Manila to the ceremony in May, I sat on a table with all sorts of people, but one of the gentlemen next to me, he was from China, and of course they don't have LinkedIn. We couldn't connect because they've got closed media. So they've got WeChat and they can't have LinkedIn. They're not allowed any of that. And he had a family medical tech business, but he also said in China, awards are everything. It'll get you government contracts. It'll get you clients. So like he'd flown over just for the day to get this award.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
I
very
think
true.
they are good, and you know, you'll reach people and you might network, but I certainly have never seen myself, someone ring up and go, oh, I'm contacting you because you won an award for innovative communication. It might be their subconscious, but it's not really what they're coming to you for. They're coming to you for the range of other things that you offer. And I think sometimes people, it's funny, I struggle with the whole posting about awards. Like I'll do it and it's like, I don't want to say humbled. I don't want to like, it's all the cliches, right? And I think that's that, you know, self-deprecating mind that I have where I'm like, are you really humbled and honored, or is it just another thing you're doing? And I like to be a bit more playful in my comms. And I think that's also my personality though. You know, I try not to be a cliche, and I try not to use ChatGPT to write my LinkedIn posts. Because I'm a writer. If I can't do that, what am I here for?
Yeah. Speaking of LinkedIn, there's some massive changes coming on.
Do tell.
Well, with video, like they've really doubled down on focusing on video. It's, you know, speaking to, you know, been in a few masterclasses lately of, you know, people that are, you know, contacted by LinkedIn to go, hey, can you put some more videos on because we want to push it now. So it's interesting. So how do you feel about LinkedIn as far as like from a social media perspective? Like what's your take on that for, you know, corporates and businesses?
I mean, it's probably the one place I will definitely get business from because of the type of, I guess, the work I do with media training and presentation skills. And it's just a ready-made network. I think it's shifted and changed. I don't post all the time, and I do try and make my posts interesting, but I'm also mindful that a lot of my clients are more conservative. So, you know, I can't do anything too ridiculous or too out there or too, because, you know, there's the gamify of how you do it. And some it's constant shock and awe, or they'll kind of put a photo of, you know, something really random, and it does get attention and engagement. I would argue, is that your ideal customer? And I think, you know, for me, a lot of the times people are looking for a safe pair of hands when they come to me for media training or crisis and PR. And so I need to demonstrate that. I can't be too flippant or, you know, kind of, you know, say bad things about media, because I need the media as well for my clients. So I'm always mindful, but I also, if something's really important to me, I'll definitely share that on LinkedIn. But I think, you know, you've got to be mindful of the audience and who you're speaking to.
Yeah, very true. What do you find with your clients that come to you? What is the main challenge that they seem to have these days that you see as more of a, you know, oh, that's quite an interesting evolvement compared to say 10 years ago?
I think a lot of people don't, I mean, it's probably not changed, but people still don't understand why they should engage with media if it's a risk. So they'll go, you know, I can do a video and upload it to our website and no one's interviewing me. It's just the CEO giving some statement that they're sorry about something, or, you know, whatever it is. And they don't want to be pushed and questioned. And they're like, you know, why would I do that when there's a high risk? But the risk is, if you don't, other people in the court of public opinion of social media will then make up their own minds. So I think for a lot of people, it's the traditional, I don't want to follow my sword. I find this hard. I'll avoid it at all costs. I'll do all the other things. I'll craft a fabulous website statement. I'll reach out to stakeholders. We'll do an internal comms vid. We'll do a lunch and learn. We'll do all the bits, but I won't go on four corners. And then they issue a statement on four corners. And every time people do that, I just think, coward. You know, you've got to go on. Everyone else has gone on. Why can't you just go on TV and do it? And even if it's really against your personal comfort zone, you know, is particularly in times of crisis, I say to people, victims are always the story. You're not the story. And people remember didn't go on as well. And so often I'm giving strategic advice to boards and execs around that. But at the end of the day, I can't force them to do it. I can just give them all the reasoning why. But I think a lot of people, there's an avoidance when it comes to doing comms or doing it consistently and well.
Yeah, amazing. What about podcasting? I know that you coach people on podcasting. How has that changed in the way we communicate these days?
There's so many podcasts, Deb. I
Yeah.
think that's a thing. I started mine in 2017. Early episodes sound like I'm in a concrete bunker because I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I worked in TV and radio, but I had tech people,
Yeah.
I just had to show up and read the news. I mean, I didn't have to worry about being mic'd up or any of that stuff. So the platforms have got better. It's democratized, I think, the airwaves in a way which is powerful and awesome. And I probably consume more podcasts than I do any other form of media because I can do them on my commute to Sydney or, when I'm doing groceries, whatever. It's probably a sign of my age as well. I quite love a podcast. Even at the gym, I listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great way to get information across. I think once again, though, to get traction, it's like anything, consistent and persistent. Like, don't do 12 episodes and go, I only got 2,000 downloads. I'm never doing that again. You got to show up. You got to keep showing up. I've had 5 million downloads. Why? Because I kept showing up. I mean, I had 3 downloads for the first month, I think, back in 2017. I'm sure 2 of them were my producer checking the sound. So, it takes time to build an audience, but also think about strategically. The first thing I say to people always is, if you want to do a show every week and you don't want to just do a season, what could you talk about for an hour every week for a year? And if you don't have 52 episodes, you don't have a show.
Yeah.
You've got a blog, or a PDF workbook or something. You don't have a show. You got to map it out and you've got to know what you're doing and you got to make sure it doesn't sound like everybody else's.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. What other advice would you have if you wanted to grow your podcast?
I think it depends on the type of podcast. So for me, I have guests on. It's not a single voice podcast. So if it's that type of style of show, like I work with corporates who do much more narrative podcast or one person podcast or advice or guests and stuff. I think having some high profile people on can help, but don't rely on it. So some of my most downloaded episodes are not the ones with Tracy Spicer or Alison Bray on them or all the people you would think.
Yeah.
It's because someone else is an expert in something that's really trending at the time, whether that be cryptocurrency or burnout or whatever it might be. So being mindful of what your audience might want and also asking them for feedback. I think people just in a vacuum chuck it out to the world. And that's not always great. Have people kind of say what they want, what they liked, why they liked it, open up that form of communication as well. I mean, you probably won't make a lot of money from a podcast unless it's picked up by a commercial network. My show's monetized now, but it took a long time. So that's the other thing. You can't do it for the money. You do it because it's a platform and a channel to get your ideas out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about ideas, you've also written a book. And how did that come about? Talk to me about, like, does it add credibility, for you? Has that helped as well?
I think it did. I mean, I wrote that book a number of years ago before the term influencer was a thing. So the word influence was just my take on what communications was really about. What do people really want? They want to be influential in their business or their life. So that book really did open some doors for me. And it was a great, I joke and say it was an expensive business card because, you don't like make a lot of money from books either unless you're a bestseller. And I was a bestseller, but it took a long time to get to that status. But it did allow me to get in. I worked with TEDx. I work with some great corporates who have a whole storytelling wing to their business. They have their own production studios in some of these big 4 consulting firms, and it's a well-oiled machine. And so if you've got a book which backs up your thought leadership, they get a taste of you before they buy your services. And I think for me at the time, it was definitely the most powerful way to open a lot of doors and send it out to all kind of potential clients at the time.
So like podcasting, it is literally a slow burn as far as you're not there to make money out of it, but it will help position your credibility and your thought leadership essentially.
And what you want to be known for. So I think we kind of, there's so many things we kind of love or we're good at, or especially as entrepreneurs, bright, shiny object syndrome. What are the 1 or 2 words that you really, want to be known for? And then you can put those into your comms. And I think that's what people remember. They don't want to go, oh, she can do a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this and a bit of that. They want to know, oh, she does presentation skills and she helps people build influence. That's it.
Yeah.
And everything else is just what else happens around. It's the tactics of how you do that, whether that be through podcasting or media or whatever it might be.
And you mentioned presenting then. What do you think the main mistakes are that people make with presenting?
It's probably very similar to when I talked about not getting that hook right.
Yeah.
And either practicing too much or not practicing enough, and not practicing in the space they're going to be in. So if you're online, we're very contained here. It's very hard to present the same way. But if you're going to be on stage, use space. I never have a lectern. I want that gone. You know, many years ago, I went on a road show with the demographer Bernard Salt, who's also a media commentator. He's the one that came up with the smashed avocado thing about the millennials, and started like a, you know, culture war about a decade ago about the too busy having a smashed avocado to actually save for a house deposit.
Love it.
But yeah, and he did have a hat saying, "Mate, smashed avocado great again," when we went on tour. So that was cool. So he could laugh about it. But he taught me so much about space. And like, say you're on a stage, he calls that front bit of the stage the point piper of real estate. You don't want to be back there. You want to be in your audience. You want to make eye contact. You want to use space. You want to walk. You want to own the whole stage. And I think particularly as women, we don't do that. We contain ourselves. And, you know, other than a TEDx talk, we have to stand on that red cross. Every other time I will try and use, even if I'm in a small boardroom, I'll move around that room. This is my room. I'm commanding the attention. I won't sit. I'll stand, and I'll make eye contact with everybody. And that actually calms your nerves as well, believe it or not. There's physicality in that. I think when we're too in our body and we're just nervous, it can come across in your voice. And so if you're moving, it's an old, you know, newsreader trick too. You try and get air into your diaphragm, and then off you go, and everything else just flows. But if you don't practice that, you won't know how to do it.
And that helps to build connection as well, doesn't it? Because you're engaging in the audience and, you know, where they feel that emotion and get connected to you.
Absolutely. So I think that's the main thing. People they either wing it or they practice it at their desk. They don't do it in space. And that's what you need to do. You actually need to move.
You know, I was talking about this when I did a recent video challenge. It was about, you know, when they were reading out their script, it's, and, you know, using a teleprompter, it's like a lot of people had expected to get it right on the first go.
Oh,
and it's like, the thing is like, if you look at an actor, they'll rehearse, you know, 1 hour for every minute they're actually performing. And so it's really important when you are doing a script is to read it out loud.
All the time, though.
All
like
the
if
time.
I've got a massive gig and I need to know in a 1 hour keynote off by heart, and I'm not a big fan of slides. That's probably my other thing.
Okay.
Slides are good. I always say to people, if you can give me the slide deck afterwards as a PDF, lovely. I don't want people reading their slides. You are presenting because you are a human. So 1 hour presentation, I'd have 8 slides max. And it wouldn't be anything particularly detailed. I'd be talking through the ideas. But it also means that if that slide deck failed, which has happened, I could still do my keynote.
Yeah.
I think the tech is a crutch, and I want people to, I call it like Barack Obama, he wouldn't have a PowerPoint, would he? So he would just get up and speak. And that's the gold standard, I suppose. And there's times you need to, you know, have some slides. But I said to people, if you could hand something out afterwards, then they're not going to be looking at the screen. They'll be looking at you. And then you're going to feel way better as a presenter.
If I was wanting to, excuse me, if I was wanting to train up to be a presenter on stage, what are the key elements that you would train somebody to do?
Basically finding, I guess, what their pain points are. So for a lot of people, it's nerves. They're they're little nervous tics. We all have them. Do they fiddle? They don't know what to do with their hands. They sway from side to side. A lot of it's that stuff, the physical manifestations. And then we worry about the content in some ways. So remember, you're speaking, it's an active, it's a verb. So you want to be making sure that you're good in how you're saying stuff as well as what you're saying. Sometimes it's about voice as well. Some people want to work on their voice and their tone and projection, breathing, managing their nerves that way. But they're the main things. It's mindset, really. And then feeling so rehearsed that you are able to do it in your sleep. But then when you get up, it's like an actor. It's showtime and you give it 180% plus. It can't sound like you know it off by heart, because I can tell when people are doing. That's why I don't love a teleprompter, I have to say. All my CEOs go, "Oh, we're doing video day. Can I have it as a crutch?" And I say, it'll be your last thing I will offer you. Like, my production team will have it and your script is loaded and ready to go. But I hate when you see people's eyes.
Oh, me too.
And they get the dead stare. That's how you are when you're on a teleprompter. You look like you are staring down the barrel of a camera. Nobody does that. We all look up, we look off camera.
100%.
And I think people think they're going to look good and they're never happy with the result. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah, I really struggle using teleprompters because, again, I would much rather know my, points that I'm talking about as opposed to using a teleprompter. I know they have their place and everything,
Have their
but
place. Yeah.
they definitely have their place. It's interesting looking at YouTube, creators. Like, I know who's using a teleprompter, and the really good guys are still expressive, and they still use
totally, because they know it really well.
Yeah.
They just do it as a backup. So as a newsreader on Sky News, I had to use a teleprompter. That's how the news comes. Like, it's all on a thing, but you also know it enough. But it's also the other thing is it's really blown up, so you kind of only have 3 words per line. You're not kind of squinting.
Yeah.
But also you get very good at having, we call it like a warm face when you're reading the news, so that you don't get that stare where you're just staring down the barrel of the camera.
And going back to presenting on stage, how important is story when you are crafting your content?
Everyone remembers the stories. No one's going to remember your data.
Yeah.
Like, you have to give people some data depending on the type of audience, your business audience. 1 in 3 Australians have a mortgage, therefore X, Y, and Z might be part of it. But the stories you tell and what cleverness you have in that is really important. And one of the things with storytelling is, you mentioned not doing I. So when you're telling a story, you give the characters names. That's something I learned very early on in some workshops I did around presentation skills with NIDA. Is, I might say, my first boss, Betty, what she really taught me is, and Betty might not be a name, but you have to do that. You can't just go, my first boss. Like, people want to know the characters. It's like you're playing, at basically writing out a script. So that's one thing. And having dialogue, super important in there as well. So you might say, and Betty said to me, the best way to get your first job is, and then gives you the advice, rather than, my first boss told me this. It's a really different way of thinking, but we try and get people to do that. And that's, like, they've done studies. People remember that they remember dialogue and who said it.
So powerful. Great tips. Wow. So much to unpack here. Tell me, before we start to wrap up, how does AI come into comms these days? How does that affect what you are doing and the people that you're working with?
So I'm going to say that I'm probably not the most tech savvy person in the world. I've got a tech platform I've just founded called ESG for PR, which is great, but it's totally a whole new world for me.
Wow.
AI for me, I think, is something where I use it to either be the starting point or a framework for client work. So that could be around their content strategy. It could be just starting off with some ideas for a particular, script that they might be working with if they're going to do some videos, just so they feel like they can then go away and work on it themselves and put themselves in it. Measuring success is really important. So having some AI tools which can do instant reporting and audience reach and audience sentiment, that's really a game changer, because in PR, particularly with corporates, they need return on investment. They want to know, basically how the campaign's gone. But certainly I have resisted having everything be techified. And a lot of what we do is fairly confidential with, say, a really high profile crisis client or government clients. They don't let us use AI. You can't use like Otter AI in a government meeting. And because they know that could be used, and that could be called up to Parliament as well, like if there's hearings. So there's a whole legality to comms that people probably haven't thought about in that way. They just think it's this great tool that helps them, but our data is being used, it's being mined, it's being monetized.
Definitely.
And so I would say there's certain things I love and certain things I've gone, let's just see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I went into perplexity before, and I was just updating some settings in the background and just made sure that a few things were turned off for that reason, that my information can't be shared and whatever. And it's just really important to check those things, because often we'll just download apps as well without actually reading any T's and C's in that. And
because you're so desperate to get to the good stuff that you just sacrifice all the privacy and
absolutely
stuff. So I think we all need to be aware of that. And I think in comms, as I said, people do hire us because we are good communicators. creators. My more junior staff, I think AI has really helped me onboard them quicker because, they might go into a Chat GPT or into a Prowly, which is a monitoring platform we use, and have some idea of what to do, and then just come to me to tinker it. I'm not having to sit with them and actually do that. But I would say to them, our clients are not paying us for something they can do themselves. So we need to put ourselves in there. We need to show expertise, and we need to show that we understand them. And I don't think the intelligence of the AI is there yet, even in terms of pitches to journalists. They would get AI pitches all the time, and I reckon they'd ignore them because it's not, you can sort of tell it's too generic. It hasn't really said, oh, this is the story you wrote last week, or I really loved how you're, covering this particular topic. It's not there yet. No, it's not personal. And same with, I don't know how you feel, but in, certain social media platforms, there's people that are instantly commenting. It's all AI generated.
Of course it is.
And I'm like, I'm sort of freaked out. And some of it doesn't even make sense. It's like the right words, but the wrong tone, or it's just too formal, or it's too American, and they're people I know. And I'm like, is this actually adding value, or you just want to be first and prolific? Is that, is that part of the strategy?
Yeah, it's definitely evolving the social media landscape, that's for sure. What about video? Is there, one of the things is, being confident on camera and getting to that stage that you can confidently talk with media. What tips would you have for people to, if they were, called up to a show that they're about to go on?
First thing is to actually watch that show. And I say that with the knowledge that most people don't watch traditional media anymore. With the world of streaming, we don't really watch shows in the same way, and news is on demand on our phones. So if you're going to go on, for example, if you're in Australia on The Project, make sure you watch The Project, know it's panel style, know that they take the piss out of you a little bit, they're joking. You have to know the news of the day. You've got to know your topic. How long are you going to be on there for? It might be 3 questions, 5 minutes. Prepare for that. Make sure you're not too long-winded, and just practice out loud. Actually, just record yourself, even on your phone. Make sure your eye line's good. Usually if you're doing, unless you're doing a cross, which is kind of like this, if you go in studio, you'll be off camera. So you'll be looking to the hosts, know where your eye line should be. And also, this sounds really a bit superficial and hopefully doesn't offend people, but dress appropriately. And I know that sounds weird, but we notice the non-verbal cues on TV more than anything else. So if someone's wearing something that's strobing, like a stripy shirt, or earrings that are really noisy and getting caught in their mic, we notice that. And unfortunately that detracts away from your message. So dress how you want to dress, but if you're representing your brand, make sure you look professional, and that you're comfortable in what you're wearing, and it's not sort of too overly dressed, but not too casual as well. I think post-COVID, we're all a bit more casual, but I often say to people, like, does that look good on camera? Like, a block color always looks great. Black and white never looks good. Like,
No.
Don't ever do that. No one wants to see that. So even for blokes, I'll say to them, bit of a colored shirt, no one wears ties anymore. And it also makes you feel like you're in the game. You don't want to be worse dressed than the host. That's what I say to them. Like if they're in a suit on the Today Show, maybe think about wearing a bit of a business clothes. Obviously, if you're in a not-for-profit and whatever, it's different. You might not work, but definitely don't dress like you're just going down for a coffee with your friend or in your activewear. And I'm saying this and I feel ridiculous, but I realized that the expectation of that has dropped because in COVID, everyone was home more. And so they do TV crosses from home. But at the end of the day, like, it all lives online for a long time. Do you want to be remembered for the person in a singlet on national TV? Probably not.
And just on that as well, like even just doing Zoom meetings, I always encourage people to, level up their Zoom. Like I've done a whole podcast episode on it of going level up your Zoom meeting. Look at your background.
Absolutely. I love that you've done that. You'd be perfect on TV because you've thought it. You don't have your old tax returns behind you, or like, the lighting's really bad, or they're kind of, you're looking up their nose because they haven't got
their laptop is down here and they're looking down at the camera. And I'm like, but you're a person in authority. And if you were in a boardroom meeting, you wouldn't present like this. So really think about how you present in your Zoom meetings, because that stuff matters, and I even see it when people are being interviewed on Zoom, like on camera, like on a TV show, and they're dialing in, and I'm like, come on, put a little bit more into it, right?
Or they're like painting is crooked, or the plant's coming
The
out of their
painting.
head,
Yes, yes.
you know,
The
and
things
people
that are
just,
crooked.
yeah, and also you can't use green screen if you're going to do a cross. So this is
Oh,
just a pull up
yeah,
background,
don't.
because you get that kind of fuzziness around your head, and also,
Yeah,
and don't blur your background. You
don't
can't
blur your background.
do that on TV. And the amount of
Mm-mm.
people that just don't care or don't think about it, it just
Yeah,
detracts away from your message. And we're not being
does.
superficial, but we
No,
are
these are
visual
key
people.
things, 100%. And that's why even when we're talking on camera, it's like I wear things that give me good energy because we know the camera, sucks the life out of us. It flattens and dulls our, expressions and personality. So it's really important. Stripes and spots and busy patterns and things, hard
And
no.
crooked, like unironed shirts. And,
Yes.
and I said to people, if you're going to go on TV, you're going to be mic'd
Yeah.
up. So,
Yeah.
have fabric like this is quite solid. I could clip a mic on. It's not going to drag. But if you've got
Yeah.
a quite thin fabric, it's
Yeah.
going to be skewy. And then you're going to look back at it and go, why did no one tell you? Because they're not going to tell you. You're just going to go in, do your thing and get off. But you'll notice it for the
Yeah.
rest of your life,
Yeah.
know?
It's even interesting. When I was on a TV show many years ago, I had to be mindful of the dresses that I wore because I knew I was going to have a big mic pack on my
Yeah.
back. And it's like if the dress was form fitting, it's like it's hard to stick that up there. And it's just
You have to
little
have a
things like
belt.
that.
Yeah, I often
Yes.
wear two pieces for that reason. Or if you're going to be
Yes.
on a couch,
Yeah.
and they're zooming out, make sure that it's not too tight or too
Yeah.
short, and you're comfortable, and that you're wearing footwear that looks okay, and
Yes.
all that stuff.
The little
So
details that matter, don't they? Absolutely.
absolutely, it's all part of the deal, and so that's TV.
Yeah, exactly. So what recommendations would you have to anyone that's in business, like small business, for example, to, get level up their comms and get seen and heard and, be recognized?
I think just have a strategy. Think about it as part of your business, not something you do only when you're launching something or you have a new product and service. Be always on,
Mhm.
and actually carve out time and I guess a PR mindset in your business to go every week. What could I be doing that's edging me towards that? You won't necessarily get coverage every week.
Mhm.
You've got to have a plan. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. No one's going to just knock on your door and say, hey,
Mm,
unless, you become very famous. So I think for people, just do it and
mm,
see it as something you would do just like you would do your tax or anything else.
mm. And is there any like tips on where they could start? What's an easy win to just get them into that mode of each week thinking about it?
I would just start turn a blog into an op-ed. That's the
Love that.
easiest thing you've do. You've got the content,
Yeah.
turn that into an op-ed for your audience. So that might be a trade publication, or it
Mm,
could be for the Sydney Morning Herald or something else. But actually
yeah.
try to get your voice out there, and then you can get the confidence, I think, to then do other mediums as well.
Gosh, so many good things. Thank you so much, Amber. And how can people find you? What have you got coming up? What's on your radar at the moment? Have you got any courses or how can people work with you?
So we have some small business packages, which I launched a couple of months ago, which are great. They're
Mm,
a way to do 3, 6 or 12-month programs with us and
mhm.
really get your education in PR as much as, we do stuff for you. So that's all on amberdaines.com. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn and Insta. My handle is Bespoke Co AD.
Love it so much. Thank you so much for your time today. I think there's been so many takeaways. I can't wait to re-listen to this episode and tune into all those good little bits of advice as well. Thank you, Amber. And I hope this episode has been helpful. And if it has, please share it with somebody else that you may know that wants to know more about how to better communicate and tell stories that make an impact as well. So thank you.